This is Matt here, and today I've got a video for you about the upcoming content for Total War Warhammer 3. Now, we don't know what Total War Warhammer 3 is going to have in it exactly. There's been a lot of speculation, there's been a lot of hints, but we do know that the team's been working on it for quite some time now. There's been a lot of speculation about what game mechanics and race mechanics from Total War Warhammer 1 and 2 might be kind of reused for the races in Total War Warhammer 3. But we kind of came across another theory in chat. We kind of struck upon this idea and then we kind of deep dived down the rabbit hole with it. But basically, what if, rather than reusing the mechanics from the Game 2 races in Game 3, the team that's working on Total War Warhammer 3 is presumably coming up with new mechanics and new race mechanics for Chaos, for Ogre Kingdoms, possibly for the Chaos Dwarves. And when the maybe when the DLC teams are working on the DLC for Total War Warhammer 2, they've seen some of the stuff that the Total War Warhammer 3 team are working on and said, hey, can we grab the code for that? We could use that for this race. Corellin, as I said, one of my viewers kind of really first sparked the idea in my mind when he said that Grom's Cauldron is obviously the Ogre Kingdoms, something to do with the Ogre Kingdoms worship of the Great Maw and their kind of food related, hunger related mechanics. And then that really struck a chord with me, and I thought, yeah, what if the developers of Total War Warhammer 3 had developed some sort of recipe making sort of mechanic where the ogre kingdoms are going to go around conquering stuff, and each time they defeat a foe they get a new ingredient that they can cook them up in the pot, and that gives them various buffs and things to their ogres. And it kind of makes sense to me that maybe that's what they're doing, and that when the DLC team was working on Grom, they're like, oh, that would work perfectly for Grom, can we have that? So the idea is that, there's all this speculation about Total War Warhammer 3, and maybe we've already seen some of it because the mechanics from Total War Warhammer 3 are actually being used in Total War Warhammer 2. So I'll kind of go back in reverse order through the DLCs and just kind of point out some things that kind of fit in a little bit with that sort of idea. So the Warden and the Paunch is the first one that sort of seems the most like that. Grom's Cauldron, for one thing, that could be the Ogre Kingdoms, something to the Ogre Kingdoms hunger mechanic, and their like eating of everything, and their god the Great Maw is just the consumer of all things. Another thing that came along at the same time as the Grom and the Paunch DLC was the Greenskin free update. Now, a few things came with that. The WAR mechanic, I don't think that the new WAR mechanic is something that's been backported from Game 3. I think that was just a rework of the existing WAR mechanic that they felt needed some improvement, and I think the new system is much better. But there is also a new mechanic that's the scrap upgrades, and the scrap upgrades is another great little addition. But I thought this could be something that maybe was something they just wanted that they saw that Game 3 team was working on, and they thought that we could grab that, tweak it a little bit, and add it for the orcs. And I was wondering if this scrap mechanic might have been originally developed to be like chaos marks or something like that. Perhaps for the demon faction you could get marks, or if you have mortal followers they could get mutations or something like that, or maybe it even could be something like for Chaos Dwarfs or one of the other factions. But yeah, I mean, maybe it was developed specifically for the orcs, but I just thought, out of the two things of the WAR and the scrap mechanics, I think the WAR was definitely developed specifically for the orcs, but the scrap upgrades, that kind of looks like something that could have come from another faction and just kind of been tweaked slightly and added on. Then we've also got Eltharion, and his Mistwalker mechanics is something fairly new, where he's got this sort of interface where he kind of chooses different things, in this abstract area that he doesn't build buildings per se in an actual on-map location, but there's sort of this other kind of ethereal realm where he's sort of building stuff, if you like. And yeah, that sort of struck me that it could be some sort of nod to, I don't know, something to do with the Chaos Realms or something like that. or even could be something that's drawn from the forges of the Chaos Dwarves or something like that. Yeah, it's hard to say. But just that whole concept of, rather than them reusing stuff from Game 2 for Game 3, maybe the stuff that's appearing in the Game 2 DLCs right now is actually stuff that they're drawing from the Game 3 races. It kind of turns things all around. So, like also how Altharion unlocks those extra Mistwalker units when he does various things. That kind of fits in with the idea of sort of unlocking different incantations, perhaps, to get access to different demons, different demon troops, or even greater demons, as you kind of put more points into your chaos stuff. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how that might work, but yeah, you can kind of imagine that maybe that's something from Game 3. The other obvious one is obviously the Norsca mechanic, where they sort of destroy a city and then they build an idol there, and that sort of gives them points towards a particular Chaos God. But I think that's kind of going back a bit too far. Like, I think that, at that point they were still making DLC for Game 2 and Game 1. But as we get sort of towards the end of this Game 2 DLC cycle, it sort of becomes more and more likely in my mind that they're actually getting ideas from the Game 3 team. Imrik, his mechanics are not really anything new. He's got the dilemmas that he gets, but that's not really a new mechanic. And the battles that he does when he gets the dragons, that's kind of seems like it's obviously taken from the Norsca Monster Hunt mechanic. So I don't think that sort of points to anything from Game 3. If we look at Malice Darkblade, he's got a few interesting mechanics that definitely seem sort of reminiscent of the of Chaos. The first one is that he turns into a demon. Now that one's not so interesting, perhaps, like doesn't necessarily mean anything, but it is kind of interesting because it's the first time that we've had a character that can actually transform into something else in the game. It was noted that when the spell transformation of Cauldron came out, that's supposed to like transform the unit into a bestial entity, whereas in the game it just sort of summons a bestial entity. With Malice, his model actually transforms into a different model during the battles. So that's definitely something that could have come from Game 3. Also, just the kind of whole concept of him, how he's got this demonic entity that he talks to, and they, I don't know if it's going to explain here. Yes, so Sarkhan is possessing him, and Sarkhan kind of talks to Malice and tells him to do evil stuff, basically. And then if Malice does it, he gets some rewards, but he loses part of his soul. So that sort of sounds very much like the sort of path of a Chaos Champion. Which is essentially what Sarkhan's trying to make Malice into. I remember one of the early White Dwarfs, White Dwarf like 40 or something, there was rules for Chaos Warbands and Beastman Warbands and stuff like that, and it had that kind of mechanic where the aspirant champion would be trying to do different tasks in order to win favor with the gods. So I kind of think that, again, Malice, I think that we've seen the Creative Assembly tries to sort of reuse mechanics in their game. So something they used in a faction in Game 1, they might try and reuse a bit of that in Game 2, or a faction when they bring out the Tomb Kings mechanics, for example, they try to reuse a bit of that for the Dwarves crafting mechanic. So they're definitely looking at how they can maximize their efficiency by using work they've done on one thing on another. So it seems likely to me that some of this stuff could be from the work that they're doing on Chaos Champions, or demonic entities for Game 3. And then that's sort of like they've sort of just borrowed a bit of that. They've sort of borrowed a bit of those builds that they've made for Game 3 to do some of Malice's sort of demonic stuff. So the interesting thing about him, I guess, is the transformation that no other characters have got. And it'd be really cool if you had sort of the possibility of turning into a demon prince at some point if you're you're a loyal Chaos Champion. Then maybe that'll be a mechanic that's going to come in Game 3, and that's why we're sort of seeing it in Malice. This I'm not sure how this possession meter could really be part of a Chaos mechanic, but yeah, perhaps that could be something as well that they borrowed from Game 3. These whispers that you get where they encourage Malice to do murder, carnage, or war in exchange for rewards, that definitely seems like a chaos god talking to their aspiring champion. And yeah, I'd really hope that they do some sort of aspiring champion mechanic where the gods give them sort of tries to influence the character, and you potentially get mutations and stuff, and your character will change. Yeah, I think that'd be a really exciting new thing, and if that is going to be in Game 3, maybe Malice is a taste of that. Now, just looking at Snickich from the Shadow and the Blade and Clan Eshin, they've got this thing called Shadowy Dealings. Now, if you just imagine that they're the team's working on Game 3, and they're perhaps working on Demons of Chaos and the Ascension part of the faction, with the Great Deceiver, giving you the ability to affect the other other factions on the campaign, do kind of mysterious dealings behind the scenes to have your crazy schemes that Cinch is famous for, and I can imagine Cinch corrupting and turning enemy generals, doing tricks to take over enemy cities and stuff like that, and that sounds very much like these Eshin actions in Shadowy Dealings that Snickich can do. So Snickich can do Insight, Scam, and Mutiny, which means that he takes over an enemy army, and has got Lair Overthrow, which means he takes over an enemy city, and also these great fire sabotage type things, really powerful sabotage type things. Pestilence, yeah, maybe that's not so much like a Cinch thing, but plunge into anarchy, you just destroy the enemy faction's leader, and their whole faction gets destroyed. That sounds like one of those great master plans of deception that Cinch might come up with for one of his champions to enact for him. So yeah, it seems like quite reasonable. I mean, maybe not likely, but possible and quite reasonable that the Game 3 team is working on some sort of mechanic that would allow a Tzeentchian champion or Lord to enact the Great Deceiver's will using some kind of system like this. And then when the DLC team had to do the Shadow and the Blade DLC and work on something for Snickich, they're like, hey guys, you're working on that Tzeentchian mysterious plans mechanic. How about we use that, tweak that a little bit and use it for Snickich? So that seems quite sort of likely to me. A bit less likely than that, I was sort of looking at this clan contracts thing, and I was thinking, if they wanted to do a rework for Chaos Undivided or for Chaos Warriors, for say Archeon or another Chaos Undivided champion, something like this could be the way they might have gone about it, where you sort of unlock points towards each different Chaos God. There is also the Norska thing that I mentioned earlier, but yeah, this is sort of a much newer, so it's much more likely that the Game 3 team has actually completed some stuff that they're working on, and they've got it nearly ready for Game 3, and therefore it sort of seems to me more likely that they could sort of borrow from that nearly completed stuff to make some of the DLCs for Game 2. Now, if we keep going back to the Hunter and the Beast DLC, then we get Nakai the Wanderer. Now, Nakai the Wanderer, again, has got another one of these mechanics where he sort of makes sacrifices to different old ones, which, could be Chaos Gods, and he gets various buffs and unlocks as he gets more favor with the particular old one. So yeah, you can kind of easily see how this interface could be, something that they created for Game 3 to get favor with different Chaos Gods or different demons. Who knows? Who knows what they're doing for Game 3? But if this was a Game 3 mechanic, that would be interesting. But I didn't really want to talk too much about that. There's a few different factions that have got, like as I said, Norska have got a similar thing, and Snickich has got his thing that's similar, and this is just another version of this sort of sacrificing or doing favors for different entities and getting rewards. So, you know, who knows? Any of those things could have been lifted from the mechanics in Game 3. I guess when the Game 3 mechanics come out, we'll see if any of them look similar. But the other thing I wanted to talk about was Nakai's how they play mechanic, where basically he actually, does it say here? Yeah, basically he's redoing of the Horde mechanic. So there's been a lot of speculation that the Warriors of Chaos will get redone in Game 3. And it seems obvious to me that Nakai is kind of like a test run at redoing the Horde mechanic. But potentially based on something that they've created for Demons of Chaos, if Demons of Chaos are going to be a Horde mechanic. I really hope that Demons of Chaos are not going to be a Horde faction. But yeah, it's hard to imagine how they might institute them. But yeah, basically how Nakai differs from a normal Horde faction in that he's got sort of like a mothership Horde, and then he's got sort of like smaller hordes as well, and also he's got a faction that basically is subservient to his faction. That's sort of like an alliance that takes over settlements that he takes over. So when he conquers a settlement, he can sort of give that to his subservient faction. So he doesn't control it directly, but he gets some benefit from it being controlled by his faction. So, you know, I'm not saying this is a Game 3 mechanic, but you know, you could imagine that maybe that's something like there's a Demons of Chaos faction, and then they have immortal followers of that same Chaos God that kind of follow along behind them. So perhaps, you know, the Chaos Demons is a Horde faction, and then there's another subservient faction that's not a Horde faction that follows along and takes over the areas that they conquer. You know, maybe, who knows. Also on the Hunter and the Beast DLC, you've got Marcus Wolfheart. Now again, this is another one of these ones where you can see some sort of possibility for one of the Chaos Gods. Basically, Marcus kind of undergoes, wins favor basically, and acclaim, and then he gets various buffs, and as well as that, he incurs some hostility from the local area. So you can kind of imagine this being some sort of rejigged version of one of the Chaos Gods, or some sort of something to do with sort of summoning demons and stuff like that. Especially with the care packages, where every so often he gets a bunch of units sent through to him. So you can sort of imagine maybe, you know, a Chaos God, you've won favor with your Chaos God, and then they send through some demons through the portal into the material world to help you with your war. So, you know, it could be something like that.
Rumors of fine hunters.
Yeah. Anyway, so he's also got this mechanic, Wolfheart's Hunters, where he unlocks various quests and things to get these special characters. I mean, there's nothing that particularly points to this being a mechanic from Game 3, but it is a pretty cool, really interesting sort of story type mechanic. It'd be interesting if that was something that they'd initially developed for Game 3, and then they've kind of backported that into Game 2, where, you know, perhaps there's different... because there's so many different characters in Warhammer that you really want to see. You can't have that many factions though. There's only sort of limited to how many factions they can make. But something like this, if it was, if the demon races had some sort of mechanic like this, or maybe this is like Kislev have a special like finding their heroes of legend or something mechanic. You know, perhaps this is something that's nicked from Game 3 as well. If we go back to the Prophet and the Warlock, we've got Tehenuan. Now, Tehenuan has got another one of these mechanics that kind of seems like a Chaos Gods type thing, where basically the more sacrifices he does, he unlocks these buffs. And then once he sort of unlocks some of these buffs, they kind of go to the next level. Yeah, I won't talk too much about Tehenuan, but yeah, like there's all these different variations of these kind of worshipping gods, doing sacrifices for gods, doing, you know, quests for demons and stuff like that. And yeah, it's really, it's hard to speculate, but yeah, any one of these things could be inspired by something that the Game 3 team were working on, or maybe they did 4 different versions of it for all of the 4 different Chaos Gods, and all of these things are taken from Game 3. Who knows? I guess we'll see soon. Also in the Prophet and the Warlock, we've got Ikit Claw of Clan Skryra. Now, around the Prophet and the Warlock DLC, I think that's when it's starting to get early enough that, you know, perhaps there's less likelihood that there's going to be anything finished for Game 3, and they're actually just making this stuff from scratch for the Game 2 DLC. But I think Creative Assembly is quite smart, and, you know, whenever they're creating something for one faction, they're thinking about what, you know, where the part of that could be used for another faction. So even though I don't necessarily think that this was that Ikit Claw's stuff was made for Game 3 and then ported back to Game 2, I think it's quite likely that when they created the stuff for Ikit Claw, they were thinking about what they could use it for later on. And I think it's
dicey death.
I think it seems pretty obvious that this potentially could be something to do with the Chaos Dwarves. Obviously, the Chaos Dwarves are not going to have their mechanic be all based around Warpstone or Weirdstone like the Skaven are. Their technology or magic technology is, I think, based around binding demons into their war machines. But, you know, instead of 3 Wordstones, you know, this could be 3 demon souls that they managed to capture or something like that. So, yeah, I feel like this could be, you know, pretty much nearly a direct port of what they're going to do with Chaos Dwarves, perhaps. Obviously, I think it's pretty likely Chaos Dwarves will also recycle part of the slave mechanic for the Dark Elves, and they'll use that as well to somehow power their faction, because slaves are a big part of the theme for Chaos Dwarves as well. But yeah, I think around this time of Prophet and the Warlock, we're getting to that period where it's early enough that I think it's less likely that the stuff for Game 3 is going to be already finished and that they're going to be like borrowing from that to make DLC for Game 2. We could keep going back through the earlier DLCs and like talk about stuff that potentially could be used in Game 3, but I think that stuff's all kind of been covered already. I kind of just wanted to share this idea that we come across. Thanks again for Corellin for all the chats last night about going down the rabbit hole about this idea. As Corellin said, the Grom's Cauldron, that's straight up taken from Ogre Kingdoms. You know, it's kind of just seems almost obvious that that's meant to be an Ogre Kingdoms mechanic and that they've used it for Grom the Paunch. So I think that one for sure is kind of really likely. And then looking also at Eltharion, that stuff that he's got with his mechanics for the Mistwalkers kind of seems a bit suspect. Like that could have been taken from Game 3, and also that stuff for Snickage and Malice, although I think it's less likely, you know, as you go further back, it's less likely that it's Game 3 stuff that's being reused for Game 2, and it's more likely that it's Game 2 stuff that they're thinking they might also reuse in Game 3. But yeah, I just thought that kind of gives an interesting different perspective on those of us that like to get into the conspiracy theories and stuff like that. You know, maybe think about that instead of thinking about what DLC from Game 2 could be reused in Game 3. Maybe think about what stuff that they've already made for Game 3 and that you're already seeing it in Game 2. Mind blown. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed that. That's all I got. Catch you next time.